thought in local history. He has written articles for Free Inquiry and the Secular Humanist Bulletin and is a contributor to the forthcoming New Encyclopedia of Unbelief with Tom Glynn. Please help welcome Tim Bing on the topic Ingersoll's Books and Primer, which will close the morning session in which we will hear him divulge what Ingersoll may have said toward the closing of his life and from, quote, beyond the veil. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm very nervous, I'm a librarian, so please forgive me. A lot of my speech is written out, so hopefully I will be able to look away from it enough. Robert Green Ingersoll was probably the most well-known orator of the 19th century and the most heard speaker before the advent of television and radio. He made speeches on behalf of political candidates. He gave speeches on national holidays like Independence Day. Sorry, I lost again. He gave funeral orations for people like Walt Whitman. He was a politico, but not a politician. Ingersoll was a lawyer and the first Attorney General for the state of Illinois, but that was the only office he ever held, and he was not even elected to it. He spoke at the 1876 Republican Convention, delivering what is known today as the Plumed Knight speech, nominating James G. Blaine for the presidency of the United States. He was involved with party politics for a number of years. Ingersoll, aside from his orations as a lawyer, made a living from his public speaking. His various speeches touched on subjects as diverse as Shakespeare, to Abraham Lincoln, to the devil, to the railroad and politics, to Robert Burns. What he is mostly remembered for are his speeches on free thought, humanism, and his agnosticism. Ingersoll became one of the most sought-after speakers of the 19th century, despite talking about subjects that were controversial. Even though he lectured on the inconsistencies of the Bible, the corruption of clergy, women's suffrage, civil rights, and other topics that were controversial to the religion of the day, he still was a highly sought-after speaker. He commanded admission charges of today's equivalent of roughly $205. He was able to fill venues and made upward of $50,000 on one tour out west alone. According to Robert G. Ingersoll, an intimate view by I. Newton Baker, he had one Chicago show where he made exactly $7,001 for a single night speech. Because he was so sought after as a speaker, his various speeches became popular enough to become published. An oration delivered at Peoria, Illinois, at the unveiling of a statue of Humboldt, September 14, 1869, yes, that's the title of the work, otherwise known as Humboldt, came as a result of a speech dedicating a statue to the famed Prussian naturalist Alexander von Humboldt. This is the first example of an Ingersoll lecture becoming a written work for sale. In fact, this work is so rare that there are no known copies in private hands anywhere. Here is another of the earliest examples of a speech delivered by Ingersoll that was transcribed and sold as a separate book. This speech was one of his more well-known ones, Thomas Paine, and as you can see, it was delivered in Farbury, Illinois, on January 30th, 1871, the 134th anniversary of Paine's birth. This was published in Peoria, Illinois, where Ingersoll lived. Ingersoll's brother-in-law, Clinton P. Farrell, also lived here, which I will discuss a little bit in depth further on. Ingersoll, by the end of his life, had almost 50 speeches that he made with regularity. According to some sources, his speeches were extemporaneous. To others, they were strictly written down, rehearsed, and memorized. While Ingersoll was known for having a wonderful memory, he could not have memorized a 3-hour speech word for word. So it appears there's some sort of middle ground here. Ingersoll was known to dictate his writings and speeches and not write it himself by hand. Here's a quote from Baker's Robert Green Ingersoll, An Intimate Portrait. Excepting social letters and memoranda found on scattered scraps of paper, he wrote little with his own hand. Nearly everything he gave for publication was dictated. His legal briefs and papers, his magazine and review articles, editorials, press interviews, monographs, speeches, lectures. Everything he wished to say were delivered in faultless form through the portals of his facile lips. Wherever he happened to be, in his office, at his home, on the boat, in the train, in the cab rattling through noisy streets, sitting, standing, reclining, he spoke the splendid words that the stenographer's art caught and reproduced for him. His famous replies to Judge Black in the North American Review were dictated at the billiard table in his home, with cue in hand. A sentence and a paragraph, then a run with the balls. Another paragraph, another run, and so on to the end. His replies to Mr. Gladstone, Dr. Field, Cardinal Manning, and other champions in the religious arena were composed under like distractions, as most would deem them. To Mr. Ingersol, however, who had as few men ever had it, the faculty of thinking on his feet, these distractions seemed only to stimulate and concentrate his thought. That was a long quote. After speaking on a particular subject a number of times, he would have the key phrases and rehearsals on how he wanted to say things, but each speech would still be different. This also explains why unauthorized editions of Ingersoll's speeches differed greatly from his authorized ones. He would be given transcripts taken from his speeches, as well as those he was creating for the first time, and would refine them to make them authorized copies of his works. I'm going to talk about C.P. Farrell now. Clinton Pinckney Farrell was the brother-in-law of Ingersoll. Farrell was married to Ingersoll's wife's sister, Sue, and served as a traveling companion, lecture manager, and sometimes secretary and publisher of all of Ingersoll's quote-unquote authorized works. From the first authorized work, Humboldt, back in 1869, Farrell was Ingersoll's agent for the lectures and for the publication of those lectures. Not much is known about Farrell. His birth date is around 1855, but I actually don't have any sources to verify it. His birthplace is also unknown at this time, but is probably somewhere in Illinois. His death is sometime after 1927, as the Ingersoll League's republication of the Dresden edition includes within its preface an indication that he had died just prior to the reprinting of that work. There were a number of letters written by Ingersoll to Farrell that appeared in the Letters of Robert G. Ingersoll, edited by Ingersoll's granddaughter, Eva Ingersoll Wakefield. These letters all appeared to be personal letters that really did not discuss the relationship that Ingersoll had with Farrell. Only one mentioned work to be done on any of these books, and the rest were all personal greetings, descriptions of what he was doing at the time if he wasn't with Farrell, things he was doing on the road, and other personal types of information. And since they were family, of course, that's kind of natural anyway. A letter that didn't appear in the book, but within his personal papers, dated from 1878, had Ingersoll ask Farrell to give up his spice business in Peoria and to work for Ingersoll full-time. This was right after Ingersoll moved to Washington, D.C., and apparently this was accepted by the Farrells as they moved to Washington with them. The Farrells lived with the Ingersolls for a substantial amount of time. They lived together in Washington, New York City, and when they moved to the estate in Dobbs Ferry, New York, where Ingersoll died in 1899. Farrell continued to publish Ingersoll works for years after Ingersoll died. Soon after Ingersoll had died, Farrell began gathering the published works together for one memorial volume. This publication was finished in 1900, and the first complete edition